Hey everyone, it's me, Bryan teacher. Technique number 1, no opt-out, is the first in our series for a reason. Of all of the techniques from this book, no opt-out is likely to revolutionize the culture of academic expectations in your classroom more quickly than any other. It's my opinion that this technique, more than any other, will help you normalize the expectation that everybody gives his or her best every day, and that they're always in the game. Because as a teacher, I think it's our job to get the most from the least and the best from the best. Imagine this. It's your first day of class with a new set of learners, and you're going around the room asking some comprehension check questions. And you finally come to one student who answers with an "I don't know," or maybe worse yet, a blank stare. Now, I'm sure you, like myself, and probably every other teacher in the history of teaching, has found themselves in this position. But in a high-performing classroom, a verbalized or unspoken "I don't know" is cause for action. When a student begins by being unable or unwilling to answer, you should strive to make the sequence end as often as possible with the student giving a right or valid answer. Now take a moment to think to yourself, what simple language could you rehearse and use to indicate that you don't accept it and plan to come back to the student for an actual answer? You might say something like, "Take a little more time to think about it and I'll wait," or "Give it some more thought and I'll be back." You might say, "Let's see how you might begin to answer and I'll come back to you shortly." Or, "We can work on this problem together and I'll bring it back to you in a moment." There are as many ways to help guide your student to the correct response as there are to cook an egg. But here, we're going to discuss 4 of the most basic and important for you to know how to use in your classroom. Format 1 is a simple call and response. You provide the answer, and your student repeats the answer. For example, you might say, 5 multiplied by 5 equals 25. Teddy, how much is 5 multiplied by 5? 5 multiplied by 5 is 25. In Format 2, another student provides the answer, and the initial student repeats the answer. Teddy, what is 5 multiplied by 5? I don't know. Charlie, what is 5 multiplied by 5? 25. Teddy, one more time. What is 5 multiplied by 5? 25. In Format 3, you provide a clue, and your student uses it to find the answer. For example, Teddy, what is 5 multiplied by 5? I don't know. 5 multiplied by 1 is 5. 5 multiplied by 2 is 10. 5 multiplied by 3 is 15. 5 multiplied by 4 is 20. What is 5 multiplied by 5? 5 multiplied by 5 is 25. Format 4 moves the assistance from the teacher to the student. Another student provides a cue, and the initial student uses it to find the answer. For example, Teddy, what is 5 multiplied by 5? I don't know. Another student might say, Teddy, it's 20 plus 5. The teacher can swing back and ask the question once again. Teddy, what's 5 multiplied by 5? And now, Teddy's armed with the answer. 25. No opt-out is surely among the most helpful and efficient techniques for raising classroom expectations. It moves students from comprehension to competence to confidence. No opt-out can be especially helpful if you have students who tend to duck away from questions rather than answer them, if you have students who don't hear themselves getting right answers often enough, or if your class lacks a culture of accountability and incentive for each individual. With no opt-out, students might not get the answer right the first time, but they will get it right every time. There's a saying that no good question goes unanswered. Well, with no opt-out, no good answer goes unquestioned. Take the rigor of your interactions up a notch by wrapping up the sequence with a request for another correct answer, or even an explanation of the why. Just because a student was not able to provide the initial answer that you were looking for doesn't mean that they don't want to, can't, or are unwilling to participate further in the conversation. One way that you can embolden and engender this type of participation is by adding rigor. Think about how you might add rigor after a successful sequence of no opt-out. One way to add rigor is to ask a follow-up question that lets the student show himself and others what he can do. Phrases such as, "Good, let's try a harder one," or "Good, now give me another example," or "Good, can you tell me why?" are important for students who want to show that they can do more than just repeat an answer. While no opt-out is a great technique and really improves engagement in your classroom, it's not without its challenges. Some possible challenges are that you might find no opt-out slows you down, or that when you call on one student, they don't know an answer. And if you call on another to help, they don't know the answer as well, or they don't want to give a clue, only want to answer. But just as these are only possible challenges, let me offer some possible solutions. If you're worried about no opting out slowing you down, this might be true, and you must balance using no opt-out against the need to keep momentum going. Focus no opt-out most on questions closest to the session's main learning objectives. However, the earlier in the year that you start no opt-out and help have it become the norm in your classroom, the less students will slow things down by trying to opt out later on. In the long run, you'll have more time to teach, not less. Another possible problem is that you call on another student for an answer, but he or she doesn't know it either. Now, one solution is that you could give that student a clue to help them find the answer. Or you could give the answer and have both students repeat it together for the whole class. Or have the whole class repeat it, using a call and response. It's all about building a culture of no opting out. I'm sure you have a few eager beavers in your classroom who are just absolutely willing to give an answer to any question you ask. Now, in this case, you might call on a student to give a cue, but he or she doesn't know how to give it and only wants to give the answer instead. So what you could say is, when I ask for a cue, I'm not asking you to answer. This difference is important, and I expect you to pay attention to it. A lot of students are really well trained at question and answer. They can provide an answer to any question the teacher gives. However, that's not the only focus of no opt-out. No opt-out is also about building a culture where students help one another, not just by giving the answer, but by giving clues and hints and tips to get them on the right path to the answer. And this can only be done with lots of practice and even more priming. So whenever you're going to call on a student to ask them for a cue or a hint or some help, you have to start your interaction off by saying that. You might say, "Teddy, I'm not asking for the answer. I'm going to ask you to give a cue to Charlie." And finally, one of the biggest challenges that most teachers have to overcome is when the initial student resists repeating the answer out of embarrassment, shame, or whatever they might be feeling. This is completely understandable. I mean, we're trying to build a totally different culture than those students are used to. So you might want to say something like, "Thank you, Teddy. It's great you struggled the first time around. It really helped us to see how challenging this is. I'm proud of you, and I'm glad that you were able to persevere." It takes time to move from comprehension to competence to confidence. So, while you're building this classroom culture, you might need to give students a few other outlets besides answering the question in front of everyone. You might have them write it down on a Post-it note in the margins of their notebook. You might have them tell it to their table mate or partner. You might have them record it in a classroom log or on a Google Sheet so that you know that they know. And finally, if your classroom is anything like mine, you'll run into other students who grow impatient waiting for someone to get the right answer. And there's no real other way to get around this besides stopping the lesson and teaching your class how to respond. You want to say something like, Just a second. Teddy is doing what we'll all be doing at some point in this class, working hard towards getting it right. I'll expect you to show your support just as he'll show it to you. That means silence, tracking, and a supportive expression on your face. No opt-out is a technique that will take time, effort, and energy to get right. It requires you to use your intuition, to know when to push, when to pull, and when to pass. You've got to know when students are getting it, when they aren't, and when you need to leave it alone. And with all that said, no opt-out is technique number 1 in your Teach Like a Champion toolbox for a reason. It works. In closing, I want to remind you about the law of diminishing intent, which simply states the longer you wait to do something, the less likely you are to do it. So, what I recommend is that you get an audio or video record of your teaching as soon as possible, and really stop and reflect on the techniques we've talked about in this video. Alright, that's it. We're all finished. And as always, thanks for listening, and we'll see you again next time.